Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and here with my co-host, Gail Burke. And we have as our guest tonight the editor of the Salem News, David Olson.
Thanks for having me,
David.
I'm looking forward to it.
And when the banner comes up, you'll see that the topic tonight is fake news. So from your perspective, what is fake news?
Well, it's to me, fake news. There's a lot of different categories of fake news. There's the what you might find on Facebook, just purely fabricated stories meant to push one candidate or another to something completely made up. There can be locally. There can be stories that happen locally that someone decides is the truth, and they'll put it out there. There's stories with slants that might not totally be the truth. So there's a wide range. Fake news is kind of a catch-all.
Yeah.
But I think most people, when they're talking about fake news, they talk about Russian bots and just stuff that's totally fabricated, cynically fabricated.
Yeah.
I think.
David, I noticed that George and I both write letters to you.
Yes, thank you.
Opinion
You
pages,
noticed
you
that.
know. But I noticed in the last year or two that there seem to be a lot of columns on the opinion page from different news outlets
Yep.
across the country. Do you think that younger people especially who don't really have a lot of knowledge about government or journalism or how things run don't understand that those are opinions rather than reporters reporting the news?
Sure, I think, yes, I do think that's a problem. And I think, sadly, it's also a problem with adults. I mean, not us. I mean, there's a certain generation that I think grew up on newspapers. My father-in-law read, they read 5 newspapers. That was back in the day when you had morning and evening editions, and people really knew what they were getting. But now there's so much out there, and a lot of it isn't labeled, and people will just read it and think that that's
right.
Someone's. And we try even online, we try and label. If it's a column from George Will, we'll put column right on the top of it, so people right before the headline, so people know what it is. But I think you're right. I think people don't discriminate when they're reading. They think, is this a news story or is this someone's slant? Which opinion columns are great. As
Well, that's
both
what
of you
they're
know.
supposed to be. Somebody's opinion.
You're arguing and you're conversing through our pages, which I think is great. But when people take that to be what
Objective
the paper,
journalism.
right? Exactly.
That's what it is.
It gets very frustrating.
And especially for, I don't know, it used to be that kids in the schools would get the newspapers. I
Right.
assume that practice is still going on.
Newspapers and education, and they used to
Right.
get physical copy. Now a lot of that has gone online, where they can
Right.
get
And I just wonder how that affects their thinking, because I think we all have to recognize that in the schools, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, or colleges, is decidedly liberal. And a lot of teachers, and particularly college professors, are not objective.
Oh, I think what schools need is a media literacy. I don't know if a whole class, but to talk to kids about media literacy, so that when they're reading something, they know what it is that they're reading. They can detect a slant when they're reading something, or when someone's telling them something. And that's, again, I mean, we all have slants.
Yeah.
We all have slants. But to be able to identify what they are as you're taking in that information is so important. And I think the information world is changing faster than teaching can keep up with. So kids, a lot of kids will just think that whatever they read online is fact.
Or whatever the teacher
Right.
tells them
Right.
is the truth.
And that gets to be the real
no
problem.
other side.
Where do you get real information as opposed to somebody's opinion? I have no problem with somebody writing an opinion. We all, like you said, we all have them.
Right.
And part of the game is, can you argue your opinion coherently so that somebody else can understand what you're saying, and with enough clarity so that, again, to your point, that, yeah, I can see what your slant is, and I can understand how you can slant the story this way based on that. That is a skill that takes some time to develop.
Right.
But at the same time, in order to evaluate a lot of these things, you have to have a database or a knowledge
Right.
base
Right.
of what is the real story. And I think this is something that's getting lost, and especially in this world of politically correct, where I think it was, what's his name, Doug Casey, made a comment in one of his columns that he likens politically correct to George Orwell's Newspeak, where people are deliberately changing the meaning of the word or using it in a different way so as to confuse somebody. And I think this is something that needs to be elaborated on, and I'm not seeing a lot of clarification on it.
I think part of the problem is that now it is so easy to only get news that you agree with.
Oh, yeah.
If I wanted to just, read all conservative news or all liberal news, I could fill my computer screen with hours and hours of stuff on the other side. And I think the challenge, I enjoy. Why would I want to just read stuff that I agree with? Why would I not? One of the great things about the internet is you can read stuff that challenges your beliefs and challenges your opinions, and I think you grow stronger from that, from reading things that are challenging to you.
Well, one of my biggest concerns, and it's getting worse, that there is real fake news. And we could go back to Dan Rather, which to me was like the birth of fake news because of what he wrote and said about former President George Bush. And it was everywhere. And people believed it because it was coming from Dan Rather. Well, come to find out, it was a totally made-up story. And he was forced to quit his job and leave.
And see, that's the
because of
difference.
it.
That's the difference between a lot of what happens now. He lost his job because of that. He paid consequences. And I think that's the difference then and now is a lot of this stuff is out there and you don't know who to go to say, this is wrong, you're responsible for this, because by that time, whatever website it is has changed its name and they've gone on to their next thing. And I think there's been, sadly, there's been fake news since there's been news. It's gone back to.
Well, but now a lot of it is generated because of the hatred for the president.
And
it's
for Hillary Clinton and for Barack Obama and for Donald Trump.
Not the same way as Donald Trump. And look at what happened recently in Washington, D.C. with those young kids from Covington, Kentucky.
Well,
When
that's
they were
another
there.
one of the problems,
Right.
that you can get a video and take a snippet of it
And put it out there as
develop
what
a story
happened.
based on pictures worth 1,000 words routine, and they all get manufactured on the spot, as opposed to, okay, let's play this out and see what really happened.
Right, and but see, that's different from what a newspaper might report that this, and they don't. With social media and the internet, everybody can have an opinion right away before you stop and spend 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 hours thinking about trying to find out a little bit more. But everybody reacted one way or the other right when it happened.
Instantaneously.
And that happens all the time, and it drives me crazy because if something happens, I'm not smart enough to have a fully formed opinion to share with the world within 1 minute. I like to think about it for a little while and see what else. There's always more information that comes up in these things.
But it's unfortunate. It all was because of these kids wearing a Make America Great Again hat. Now, when does the hat become the symbol of hate? And then you have the Native American beating a drum in the kid's face. And the other people behind him were swearing and yelling and screaming. And the whole thing didn't come to light for days. And what happened was these kids got suspended from their school. And it's having terrible consequences. They've been threatened. I mean, these things always have consequences that people don't even think about.
Right, but I think in that case, I'm listening to it from your end, but the other, I mean, there are other stories that are coming out of that it's
Yeah.
not quite as cut and dried as you're making it out to seem, that there was a whole different, it wasn't that first 10 seconds of film, but it's not quite that way either. And it's almost like, what was the Japanese film, Rashomon?
Yeah.
Where they told the same story through 4 different sets of eyes, and everybody had a different perspective on it.
It's the old cocktail joke of passing a story around.
Right, exactly. Or the old game you used to play telephone, and by the time it gets to the
Yeah.
last person, it's something completely
Well,
different.
but unfortunately, or fortunately, somebody else taped the whole thing, and they saw what happened.
But I guess my question is, to me that's not news. That's something totally different happening
Yeah.
over in the social media. To me, that's part of the problem, and it's part of the problem not just because everything happens so fast that people can't have a rational discussion
I
about it.
think part of the problem you're alluding to is the fact that the media is losing control of the information
Sure.
source.
Sure.
And now there's so many other sources that they're instantaneous, and somebody can come up with a story based on that, and it takes the media so long to get the total story out
Right.
and the right perspective on it.
And
But
by
they-
that time
they put
they've
it out.
And by that time they've moved on. But no, by
Yeah.
that time they've moved on to let me give you an example. Remember a couple weeks ago, the young woman from Wenham was in Boston, and she had been abducted for
yeah.
2 days
Yeah.
and had held captive for 2
Right.
days, and thank God she was found safe. But around that same time, there was something going around virally around the internet in that area that it was part of a kidnapping ring run by Uber and Lyft drivers. You know, and people were sharing it and sharing it and sharing it, and I saw people posting on Facebook. I saw friends, and fortunately, the local paper there finally was able to do a story, talking to the police and talking to no, none of this is true. But by the time that story was published, it had already been posted on 10,000
Yeah.
people's Facebook page. And people, and this is a frustrating thing, and if you guys know the answer to this, I wish you would tell me. People always share the fake news, but they rarely share the corrective. They rarely
That's
share the
true.
story that
Yeah.
is. And we spend so much of our time correcting stories like that. It
But the
can be
bigger
maddening.
news, some of the bigger newspapers, like the New York Times, do not. And they'll go forward with it and print it, and they'll make a little change in it, but they don't ever apologize.
Oh,
And unfortunately, those things stick with whoever the story is about.
I mean, I think they have a pretty robust corrections policy,
New York Times?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I disagree with you.
Yeah, but
and we can do that.
It's like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Washington Post.
But it's on the
Same
fourth
thing.
page.
What's
Yeah,
that?
But it's on the fourth page.
Right.
Yeah,
But it's
or
on the same
In
place.
the middle of
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
paper where
Right.
nobody sees it.
Yeah.
So,
But where is it anywhere else? It's nowhere.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems, that the story has a life and it runs its course, and by the time the corrections come out, what was that all about? We've gone on from there. And the updates and the corrections aren't as fast as the original story, so you're always behind the power curve on it. And the other point you were bringing up a little earlier about the abuse that the presidents get, this goes way back. Eric Burns wrote a book, 2004 to 2005, called The Infamous Scribblers, in which he was relaying all the nasty stuff that was going on with our founding fathers.
Right.
And
Jefferson and Adams. I mean, it was brutal in those days.
And-
It was,
it was brutal.
there's another
But
book.
it's different today. I think it's
Well,
different.
no, it was worse then. I mean,
I don't think
some of
so.
the comments they made about Jackson's wife.
right.
And even George Washington, we used to refer to Jefferson as a scurrilous.
Right.
For the attacks that Jefferson portrayed on Washington, and he paid various editors, or had editors in his pocket that would
Right.
put out this stuff. So they were more or less his propaganda machines.
right.
Well, I used to think that it was bad against George Bush. And then we had Obama, and the press loved Obama. Anything Obama did was okay with them. Then along comes Donald Trump. And from the day he stepped on that escalator, it was bad news. They tear apart his family. They tear apart his little boy, his wife. You notice that his wife is gorgeous, beautiful woman. Very rarely do you see her picture in a major magazine like other wives, other first ladies have done. It's developed into, and I've seen it firsthand. It's developed into a real hatred.
Oh, yeah.
And
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, do you think Fox News was easy on Obama or on Michelle Obama?
I don't think they were as bad as the New York Times and the Washington Post is on Trump. Absolutely not. First of all, they didn't go after their families. Okay? The New York Times,
I would probably disagree with you on that, but
they didn't go after Obama's family, his children in particular. But these newspapers today, and even the politicians on the left, nothing sacred. Look what they did to Kavanaugh, and his wife was sitting there listening to all that garbage. They attacked him. They made fun of his children. I mean, it was obscene, and that was pure hatred.
but I guess my feeling on that is I don't think it started with Trump.
I didn't mean
Yeah.
it started with Trump,
Right.
but
It
it
started
certainly
with
has
Washington and
increased.
Jefferson.
And that, I mean, and to my mind,
Jackson.
that's not
And don't
necessarily-
forget, in the days of the founders, there was no television, there was
Right.
no
No,
social media, so there was very
took a-
limited.
No, it just
And
took a little
ti-
longer to get it
yes,
out.
it did. Now
Yeah.
it's there in your face all the time. And I worry about the children in school, particularly the little ones. They see it, they hear it, and they pick it up. And they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. And nobody ever
Well, I
explains
think that's
it
true
to
for
them.
adults too. A lot of adults.
For sure. That's true too, yes.
Unfortunately, some kids are bigger than others.
Right,
yeah.
right.
I
But-
did want to ask you about, you have formed a literary group with people from Rockport and Gloucester. What is that about?
This is the work by Ray Francoeur and some other people in Gloucester who put together a group to promote things like authorship, writing, literacy, media literacy. We did a program in last May about fake news, and we had some people over at the Rockport Library and did a seminar on fake news and kind of had a discussion a lot like this.
I can't even talk. Is it a diverse group though? Because I see some of the people on there from the Boston Globe and from different groups, and it didn't seem like there was a lot of diversity on
Well, I think you need
Within the
to.
group.
I think ours, we focus mostly on actual news. And I think if you want to talk about there's news and there's opinion, and I think our pages, our news pages are separated from opinion. And I think you also need to separate community journalism, which is a lot of what we were talking about in May, from the Fox News and the MSNBC, and that's a whole different ball of wax. I mean, that's punditry, and that's just people talking for money,
Yeah.
essentially. And that's
Yeah,
not what.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, we
we're
started-
all getting paid here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, big bucks. Well,
We did
you,
2 shows this week, so we could double our salary.
you started to talk before. Now I lost my train of thought.
Okay.
Go ahead, George. I'll pick it up
Well,
again.
okay, we get into some issue. Okay, even on the local papers, what do you think is the obligation of the media to look at an article or a presentation that is portrayed as news, not the opinion stuff, but the news, and correct it and put out the right thing? And the kind of thing I'm thinking about is our local congressman stood up there one day, and you published a picture of him in his battle rattle with his
Always.
with a gun in his arm, and he said, "I know what an AR-15 is. I carried one in combat." And although the picture wasn't clear enough, I bet dollars to donuts he was carrying an M4, which is the carbine version of the M16, the TONE weapon, which is not an AR-15 or in very significant differences. And yet no correction was pointed out in this thing. I know somebody wrote a letter to the editor, not me, somebody else writes it besides me, and made that particular that comment. Or the other one that surprised me is you had an article again showing the mayor of Beverly in the glow of the menorah that they just lit for the Hanukkah. And 2 weeks before that, they were lighting the holiday tree.
Yep.
And there's only one holiday that I can think of that lights a tree up with the tinsel and all that. So in one case, it's very explicit that I think it's a very good idea to say, hey, we lit a menorah in town. Very diverse. But why not call it a Christmas tree?
Well, in that case, you take that to the mayor, because that's what the city of Beverly calls it, is a holiday tree.
Yeah.
When we write about Christmas tree farms, we don't call them holiday tree farms. It's to me, that's a very specific choice by the city of Beverly.
Yeah, that gets into the issue of you're quoting somebody exactly, but if the quote is wrong, strange, what's the obligation you feel to
It depends. In a case like that, I mean, we quote it, and people know what the tree is. It's not. It's not. If we quote someone and something needs more context, we'll add context after the quote. If people didn't know what a holiday tree was or what a Christmas tree was, we'd say, it's a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
So we always try, and our goal is to make things easily understandable by the readers and make sure they have the context they need when we're reporting.
I do have a question again about the opinion page. Who determines the headlines?
Sometimes it's me. Sometimes it depends how much space we have. Because if we run one of George's letters and it goes across the top, we have this much space to write a headline. If it goes down the side, we have this much space to write a headline. So in print, the headlines sometimes are, are not what people might have hoped they were, but online we can have all the space in the world. So that we tend to try and stick to the original headlines in those cases.
Because I know, not your paper specifically, but I know other papers have headlines, and very provocative.
Well, that's the whole idea of it. It wants you to read the article.
Exactly, but you read the article,
it's the hook.
it has nothing to do with the headline. And people will say to me, who writes the headlines? I said, I know it's not the author of the piece who writes the headlines.
Right. Well, a lot of times a lot of people react to the headlines and they won't have bothered to read the actual story.
Yeah, that's
or
another
column
horror
with
story
it.
there. Yeah.
Well, I read from your literary group again, they had a list of how to detect fake news from real news. And I was reading down the line, and it gave some good ideas. One of them was you have to do some investigation and fact-checking. And I chuckled, because I know I fact-check things. Who checks the fact-checkers? Because sometimes the fact-checkers are fake news too.
Or, I think you have to, sadly these days you have to do your homework on a lot of,
Yes, you do.
my rule of thumb is if the story seems too good to be true, or I agree with it too wholeheartedly, that's when you stop and check and make sure. And one of the blessings of the internet age is there are so many sources of factual information out there that if a story is out there and you're not 100% sure of it, you can do your own homework.
Yeah.
Well, we can, because we're used to doing it, but again, you have people that either don't have the time, don't take the time, or kids, particularly in high school or in colleges, and they don't.
And I think that's a case where you need to find sources that you trust and that are accountable. And I think that's one of the things about local journalism and local newspapers that sets us apart from other places. When when both of you, I mean, anybody, when you read something in the paper you don't like or you think is wrong, you know where to find me.
Yeah.
You know where to find me at the Y in the morning.
Yeah.
And I'm accountable, and you can call up and say, well, what about this? Or you can write a letter disagreeing with something, and it gets in the paper. And I think you find it doesn't mean that you agree with everything we write on the opinion page, or you think we did every story as completely as you might think, but you know who we are, and you know we're real people, and we're accountable to our readers. And I think that's the difference between us and some of these Facebook operations.
Well, I think one of the
Excuse me, George.
commercials I'd like to add in there is the Beverly Library puts out a thing called Wildberry, where they list all the new books.
Yep.
That's a great resource to find out diverse information. The point you were making earlier, well, it's not exactly what I agree with. I know this author and I know what he's going to write,
Right.
but I really need to see exactly what he's writing. And the other one I like is a Facebook page called Curora, where people will write in a question and a bunch of people will give answers.
Yep.
And they take votes on it and they pick the
Right.
most
And
popular.
the Beverly Library still has a very robust reference desk. And
Yeah.
reference librarians are
Yeah.
a gift from God. And if you have a question, they'll help you find anything.
Yeah.
We're down to the wire. We have about 2 minutes left. Is there anything you would like to end the program with?
Well, I would like to first thank you for having me on. I mean, I think one of the reasons I agreed. I always try and go on these things, but you have been loyal readers for years. I mean, you were on one of our reader
panels,
advisory boards,
yes.
which is another thing that I think sets us apart. So I think I would just urge people to subscribe to a paper, that you trust and that you know who's involved with it. And I prefer it would be us, but read something every day. I would ask people to read something every day and not rely on your friends on Facebook to give you your
sure.
news. And I think that's the danger we're at today. And I think that's why we're kind of, I think that's a lot of the reason we have the political climate we do today, is because people are willing to take everything at face value or believe nothing. They'll believe everything or they'll believe nothing. And I think that's not the way. That's not the path forward.
No.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. It was a lot
It
of
took
fun.
something to get you here, but
But we made it.
We
Yeah, we
made
made
it,
it.
and we hope you'll come again.
Great. Absolutely.
Okay.
Be great.
I want to thank the audience for watching. You know that we do all kinds of shows, and this was particularly relevant because of the situation going on in the country today. So we hope you continue to watch, and please let us know if there's something that you would like to see that we haven't done. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.